Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Jaap Sluijter. He's the current executive director at the Krishnamurti Foundation of America. Previously, he was a teacher at Brockwood and also formerly an engineer.
It's working? Good. Well, nice to see you all. You were expecting Connie Jones. She's on the program, and as you've seen, I don't look alike. Connie was sick. She called in, I think it was on Thursday, that she has bronchitis. So the doctor ordered her to stay in bed. So you have to do it with me. Now, you might think, hey, how do I get a talk out in 2 days? I didn't. I'm more or less going to redo a talk that I gave just 3 weeks ago in Argentina when I was visiting there. And I actually improved upon it, so you get the improved version. So I always have some disclaimers which I put in because that makes it easier to discuss afterwards. First of all, I discuss my personal understanding of Krishnamurti's work. I think we're here as friends, we all have our views, and I feel it's really important that we explore K and tear it apart, look at it from different angles, and I'm presenting my angle on it. So that's first disclaimer. If you want to study Krishnamurti, go to his books, that's really, but if you want to engage with other people on it, then I'm happy, because I really like Krishnamurti's work. That's why I'm here, of course, and I like to share it with you, my understanding. Also, the title of the talk, tentatively, is chosen Krishnamurti and Psychology, a contrast in understanding of the human psyche. And I do that in order to, because I think what psychology is, as a collective saying, more or less saying, is a very good analogy or a very good entrance point on how we internally believe what we are as human beings. And so by contrasting that, I think we can, it's really a great way, I found a great way, to contrast what Krishnamurti says and what we as humanity, as humans, think how our psyche is working. So and I hope that comes out nicely, because that's how I feel it's really powerful. And also, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, and if there are therapists in the room or psychologists, don't get offended if I, by contrasting something, put one up and other down. That's not my intent. My intent is to draw contrast. So don't throw things. So the first thing, and for those of you who have read Krishnamurti, is about, he talks a lot about conditioning and how conditioned we are. And when we automatically go to the place when somebody talks about conditioning is, oh yes, I had a bad experience in my youth, or something has happened to me, or I'm grown up in a certain culture, and that you call conditioning. But I think that is somehow, conditioning means more. It's almost like the conditioning is like a transparent layer of how we look at reality. We think we see reality as it is, but actually we don't see reality as it is. Now, and that's on many different layers, and I'm trying to bring that out and how important that is. And of course, in the previous speaker spoke about consciousness, and Krishnamurti, and I think I used it already in the panel, but Krishnamurti was very clear. Consciousness is its content. So that's really important to keep in mind. From Krishnamurti's point of view, what emerges in your consciousness is actually the content that's been recirculating, but it doesn't appear that way. It appears to us as something new, as fresh, as thought out in this moment. Yes. So now to illustrate how powerful that is, this illustration is very simple, but it makes something clear. Like if you're really fearful, like this morning, when you're in a dark alley and somebody tells you it's a dangerous alley and you see the appearance of a shadow of somebody being there, you immediately feel suspicious and fear. Now, it's not there's suspicion and fear and you objectively looking at it. It's actually you are suspicion and fear. And that's a completely different quality. So your state changes and you look and your brain collects its thoughts and its associations according to that state, which is different from how you perceive it, that there's fear and you objectively start to determine possibilities, what you should do and act accordingly. So when there's a state of fear, it changes your who you are. So the fear is not different from you. It's not you and the fear, it's you are the fear. The same with anger. If you're really angry about something or someone, you think there's you and the anger, and you can objectively look at that while you're in the state of anger. But I would like to propose, and that's my understanding of Krishnamurti also, that actually that's not the case. What's happening is the thinking, the association and the thinking that happens around anger is the anger. It's not an objective analysis of what's happening. So that's my claim here, that these states, conditioning and those states are a transparent layer through which we perceive reality, and these states, that is colored. It's colored most of the time, but especially colored when we're in emotional states. Yeah, so that's the beginning. I hear a phone ringing, it's fine, it's a nice ringtone. I'm in a different state already. So the other aspect, which I think is important to bring in, is that conditioning is not only turned inwardly, so how we perceive our states, but it's also how we act socially with each other. And an important aspect of course, we're all aware of our physical evolution, how we raised from whatever ancestors we had slowly to humans. But also we have a lot of social and cultural evolution, how our minds navigate social things, social situations. And many of our behaviors, and I think there's quite a bit that supports that also, that we act as a sophisticated group of monkeys. You know, we have hierarchies. Even if you have a small group of people, you will see who's the alpha and who's the beta, who has the opinions, who's not, who you have to please and who you don't have to please. So there's a constant social maneuvering happening in groups, and if we are with other people, which you're not aware of, but you're acting out anyway. You're not constantly choosing. After the fact, when somebody points out to you, you might create some kind of narrative about it. You might say, well, I did it because this and that, but in the action, you're just acting out your social conditioning, your cultural conditioning. And that's very disturbing because, of course, we feel that we have agency and that we have agency to a certain extent, but we're not as free as we think we are, that we are not really the driver. The car is driving and we're putting a narrative on top of the driving that we are driving the car. But you're doing, and you put a story on top of why you're doing it and what you're doing. That's my claim here. I put contrast, I made it more, in order to distinguish, I try to bring it out. Social things are like grooming, hierarchy, signaling, what you signal, those kind of things. Yes, and then there's another thing which is also very disturbing for us as humans when we come across it in our daily life or in our relationships, is that it's not, we're not whole. It's not one you sitting in your mind with a certain set of ideas and a certain set of values. There are contradicting part. We're fragmented. There's one fragment that is the nice you, who is always collaborative, and then there's another part of you, which is the angry you, or it's the one that is the child, or the one that's the dominant one. So the different aspects, different fragments, and these fragments are also in conflict with each other, because the nice you doesn't really want to know the angry you. So they keep, these fragments are really kept more or less apart, as different parts, maybe even different parts in brain structure, I don't know. But maybe at least in thought, in the information and how the information is stored, it's compartmentalized. And the fragmentation, of course, we know how that happens. It can be trauma, it can be personal experience, or it can be just that, and maybe that's a higher claim, it can be that that's how our brain is functioning. So it will create fragments, even whatever your history is. So the psyche is in conflict. So that's a very important, even if there's no stimulus, if there's no situation, it's in conflict because already of its fragment. So then I tried something, maybe I should talk about that, because somehow it has been my passion or my interest to somehow, when you read Krishnamurti, to somehow give it, and when we talk about it, to somehow make it more accessible, or put it into different words, or to make it more visible what he's trying to say. And in that light I'm standing here, to somehow make more visible what he was talking about. And I came up and I found that expensive with that series with Ontology, the nature of things. I don't know if that word is being used a lot, but I didn't use that word so much, but recently I saw the word ontology, which is the nature of what it is, what things are. Now, what is the nature of our thought, of our psyche, and looking from Krishnamurti's point of view? Meaning, from his point of view, what I extract from his work, right? So first, the self is a phenomena. We experience it. Each one of us has a sense of self. It's a phenomena, but it doesn't exist. It's recreated every moment. Now, how we experience it as something that's been there permanently. Yourself has then been there for you all your life, and it's a very familiar feeling, and it feels like it has continuity all the time with you. But the claim is actually that this self is recreated every moment, and that you're not the same self as 5 minutes ago. That's maybe the claim in extreme. Krishnamurti has a nice metaphor in the book Reflections on the Self, where he says, well, it's like a fan spinning, and if a fan spins very fast, it looks like one hole. But then when it slows down, when thought slows down, you see that there's 3 blades that are rotating. And it's a little bit like that. So because of the speed and how fast the thought operates, it looks like it's one continuous flow. But then when it starts to slow down, if somehow by not feeding it, maybe it slows down, then you see the different blades or the different thoughts. How does that sound so far? Is it okay? Not too fast, not too loud, not too... Yeah? And my accent is fine also. Huh?
I said, what accent?
What accent? Oh, good. That's a compliment. The other thing is, and that word we heard this morning also, that the psyche operates in duality. So, and that's also an interesting aspect, right? The psyche, that we have a sense, and maybe we forget to look like that. We have a sense that you're thinking about something, which is you, and then what you think about, as if you can split that. And that feeling is very deep. I am thinking about this. And in Krishnamurti's work, actually, he will state that this division, this duality, which he refers to as the observer is and the observed, is an illusion. It's thought looking at itself, at its own process of thought. There's no two streams of thought that are happening. There's no neutral witnesser in your thought, in your thinking, that looks objectively at your thinking. Very disturbing, of course, right? If you start to realize that. I mean, you know, how much have we invested in the idea that we have an independent thinker in our head? And then somebody comes along and says, well, you know, tough luck, it's not the case. So the other part of the ontology is that the human brain thought is constantly trying to move from what is to what should be. So it's always trying to become something. Now, that's a movement that we don't actively do. It's not you decide upon to improve, but the brain, just by how it's dimensioned or how it's constructed, it will constantly look for the next best thing. And that is conflict. And that movement from what is to what should be is a conflict, and because it's perpetual and it's not driven by a particular circumstance, it's what we call human suffering. So that's the nature of human suffering, which is more than conflict in itself. And I feel that's really important, because normally we use the word suffering for, oh, you know, if you look at Gaza, really horrible. If you look at Sudan, really horrible. And those are events. Or somebody who has a very bad disease, you say horrible. But the suffering is there, is an ongoing movement in everyone. There's no exceptions to it. And it's not, I suffer now because of this. No, you're suffering because that's the nature of how thought operates. It wants to move away from what is. Yeah, so that's that bit. How do we time's good. So now I'm going to the next bit, the question of help. Help. Now, for those who are familiar with Krishnamurti's work, Krishnamurti didn't like the word help. And there's a very nice anecdote which you can find online of a woman called Laura Huxley. And Laura Huxley was the partner of Aldous Huxley. She was a psychotherapist. And she recalls a meeting with Kay at a party, and she was standing there somewhere in the back room, and she was telling him how she was helping people through psychotherapy and psychology and whatever she was doing. And while she was talking, she recalls how Krishnamurti's face changed. And she said, I knew something was coming. And then at a certain point, she writes there, he spat out, you know what I think of people who try to help others? And he said, what did he say? Something along the lines of it's really bad. It's like a horrible thing to do. And now, if you look at his work, of course, it's consistent. It's not that he says if you help somebody who is lying on the floor and has a heart attack, it's not about that. But if you have to help somebody with a heart attack, right? I mean, you would agree, right? I would help. I would try at least. But it's more like if you... If somebody's in a state of suffering and you claim to know what that state of suffering is about, and then that person accepts what you believe about that state of suffering, then it won't directly look anymore at their own suffering. It will start looking at the suffering through the eyes of that particular statement. That's why Krishnamurti is so much against religion, or any form of guru or any form of religious text or something. It's not that he has a problem with reading that and studying that and to get a good understanding, but it becomes a problem if you start to look at your life, at thought, through that system. Because if you look through that system, you no longer look directly at what is, at what's happening in your mind. You look through the filter of that. And throughout his work, he will make very clear the most important thing that a human can do is observe itself without any interference. And if that is true, and that's the most important thing, of course, then you don't want to put something in between as the opinion of others on your suffering. So any form of Krishnamurti denied any form of authority in these cases. Everybody individually has to look at the content of their own mind by themselves. And then true freedom is true direct self-observation, unmediated by others. No system, no method or guide can bring that about, only insight. And then, of course, now can you do nothing? Well, no, you can't do much, but he does. But if you look at Krishnamurti's work, he does say do certain things. First of all, we are in a Krishnamurti school. So somehow he did say, well, it's important to have the right kind of education. So somehow that does help the human to maybe set them off rightly. And he would say, well, it's important to meditate. He would say, well, he has a particular definition, choiceless awareness, but he would say it's important to meditate. He also said there's importance to dialogue, to discuss with each other. Not from a particular point of view, but to discuss, to explore questions, and not try to arrive on anything, to explore those questions. And he, in some of his work, and it's actually, and it's more the work in discussions with staff and with students, the possibility of communion, right? That people who talk or who are in relationship with each other, there's a possibility of communion where you look at the same thing at the same time. A sense of, looking at the same thing. So it's not that he says do nothing, there's nothing possible, but he did, Good. So now I arrive to the final bit, what I was trying to say. Well, final, mostly final. So if we look roughly, without trying to insult, without trying to bring psychology down, but compare Krishnamurti, what he says about certain areas of the human psyche, and what he talks about in his teachings, I look at 5 different main areas. The first area, what is really the root of fear? Now, in psychology, in general, it says past trauma. Memories that you have, particular relationships that are traumatic, experience that you have. And Krishnamurti says, no, the root of fear is the movement with the desire to become something else than what you are. So that's a very important, so that fear is not particularly to a particular circumstance in your life. The fear is the root of fear is the ongoing attempt to become something. The second one is psychological freedom. In psychology, generally, it's achieved through therapeutic process over time, where you go through memories, where you go through your past, where you start to understand a certain behavior that you have. And for Krishnamurti, freedom is immediate. Freedom, it's the freedom from any form of psychological time. And the third one is, I think, a really important one, is in psychology, there is, roughly again, there's this division between the therapist and the patient, or the patient looking at his own thinking. In all those scenarios, the therapist and the patient, or the patient looking at his own thinking, there's duality. There's a separation of the observer and the observed. Krishnamurti says that's a problem because both are conditioned. And so is it possible to observe without an observer? And that the division, it doesn't exist, because the therapist is suffering. In the root of suffering, the therapist is as much suffering as the patient. And so that division is artificial. Now, I mean, maybe to restate it, I think psychology is a very important field and and it's very important to do it. So I'm not saying, but I'm just wanting to draw the contrast here. Then the fourth one is the process of change, process and change. In psychology, roughly, change unfolds through a process. You work through your different traumas, the different issues that you have. Gradually, you try to solve them. You try to identify them, locate them. What is prohibiting you in your life and preventing you in your life from involvement, and you work on that. For Krishnamurti, it's very clear there's no process. Insight is instant. He said, through observation, it's possible to have insight into the nature of self, and that's in an instant. And seeing the false as the false ends it. That's his claim. The fifth one is healing. Now, the word healing, of course, Krishnamurti doesn't use the word healing. I mean, one of the famous quotes, which I think the most famous quote of Krishnamurti, which you see everywhere. Recently you saw it in the news when that insurance man was killed in New York. I don't know if you know, there was a man who was very famous. Yeah. So he had in his blog, he had this quote of Krishnamurti: "It's no sign of health to be well adapted to a sick society." Yeah. So there's a difference between if the onset is to make you adapting and functioning in the current society or according to societal norms, that is not freedom. Right? So that's really important. So in psychology, a different state comes about through examining and changing thought. And Krishnamurti states, thought is the problem. You don't want to change thought. And a state of freedom or healing is beyond thought. And it's actually understanding the nature of thought where the change is. I'm still good. So then I have a last bit, which I hope is a little bit a better bit than what I said so far. Because for some, and that might be a good point, it's like, oh, the ending of the self is the most important thing. And I think Krishnamurti, in the discussions with Bohm, he brings that out more clearly. He said, no, that's a small thing. We know it, we don't know how to do it. But he says, no, that's just the beginning. That's when it starts. So, and that refers to how I understand is like, what is our human potential and how can a human function? It's somehow, a quality of a possibility where we're having a conscious mind, but at the same time have this kind of innocence that an animal still has, being free in the field or something like that. And I think our human brain somehow has that capacity of not functioning from a center. And that's what Krishnamurti talks about, and that when it's not functioning from the center, there's a whole different possibilities are opening. And of course, obviously, that constant preoccupation with becoming just blocks that deeper potential. And is it possible? So if you see that we're constantly occupied with ourselves, with our conflict, with our becoming, the amount of energy that goes into that is tremendous, right? I'm already, in the background, I'm thinking, oh, do they like my talk or not? I'm already preoccupied with myself. So each of you is also somewhere. Maybe you're here listening to my talk. Maybe you're wondering, who is my partner? Has my partner done the dishes or something? Worrying is happening by itself. But can you imagine that kind of dissipation of energy is not happening? And how much, and what will happen with that energy if it's not dissipated that way? So, I would like to end with a quote So meditation is the freedom from the known, which is the measure. And in that meditation, there's absolute silence. Then in that silence alone, that which is nameless is. And that's the talk so far. We're going to do a panel, so I think it's going to be Leah and Terry. Audio okay? Maybe you want to say something?
Hello.
Yeah, good. Want to say something, Leah?
Can I just start? Or
Yeah,
do
start.
we want to introduce
Yeah,
Terry
it's good,
maybe?
it's good, it's good. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, did we want to introduce Terry? Do people know
Oh,
Terry?
yeah, introduce Terry, yeah.
Yes, this is Terry O'Connor joining Jaap and I for this panel. Terry is a former therapist. That's. Let me know if I missed anything.
That's all I've done my whole life. I guess the main thing I've been doing here at Krishnamurti Foundation is doing dialogue and facilitating dialogue, and so that's really what I've been doing mainly. But other than that, yeah, I'm retired and therapist. That's good enough.
And you were the main organizer of the Labor Day meetings on the East Coast, right?
Yeah. Tom, you went to those. Maybe some other people here did that.
Mm.
Yeah. I did it for 25 years until COVID shut us down.
Yeah.
Mm. I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
You kept talking about this becoming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, thought is always trying to become something. So what would it even look like to not be anything, or to not become? Because I think that's just hard for me to think about. It almost seems impossible sometimes.
Mm.
Like, what do you mean I'm not supposed to strive for something else or
Yeah.
be somebody?
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't know how to answer that. It's a bit complicated, right? Because I think it looks. There are two aspects at stake, right? So first of all, from where we are, where we identify with our sense of self, I mean, to put the question, hey, can I try not to become, is in itself a meaningless question, because the only thing that is again trying to become something, right? Can I become non-becoming? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's a trap question in a way. So if that's but is it possible to see the movement of trying to become, right? I am this and I want to be that, or yeah, I guess that's where I would go. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, trying to imagine where you'd be if you achieved all these things you're talking about is kind of, fruitless. The only way I can see it is to see how it's actually operating in my life. You know, if in fact I'm less worried about what people think of me, if I'm less concerned about making sure I do everything right in order to achieve a certain thing, as opposed within a realm. Obviously, if I'm trying to build a cabinet, I want to do everything right. But in terms of building a better me, that whole business of becoming, it never works anyway. I mean, you know, how much of us how close have we come to perfection after studying Krishnamurti for decades, right?
Yeah.
We still got a long way to go, and it doesn't seem like I'm at the finish line. So I think seeing where it is operating, notice, I think that's important, actually, because we can get discouraged sometimes, because he has a pretty high, I mean, he had pretty high expectations himself, right, to set humankind absolutely unconditionally free, so, which he felt short of also. So, yeah, I think it's noticing the progress we actually see in ourselves. That, I think, is important.
Terry, actually, I have a question for you, even though you weren't the person to give this talk, but it relates to something Jaap said, which was about Laura Huxley and helping people, and how, I mean, how do you is it possible to do, you know, to actually help people as a psychotherapist, keeping in mind in what Krishnamurti said about that?
I never saw the contradiction. I discovered Krishnamurti in graduate school, not in graduate school, but while I was going to graduate school, and it just knocked my socks off, and it just widened and deepened my whole understanding of what a self is. So I never had a problem with that. It was like, in some ways, it was really helpful because that perception of a self is so, there's so much room to operate when something is seen as an illusion, as a concept, that we're caught in this kind of illusion of this thing, as opposed to this is an actual entity that I need to work on. It somehow, and also in time you mentioned, you know, the therapist being separate from the client, because the therapist is kind of the authority and the client's doing that. But first of all, let me go back. In terms of Krishnamurti's perceptions of that, which I think you accurately, you know, described, I always thought that was like an image he had or something, that it was 1930s and 1920s psychoanalysis that isn't what people do anymore, and they haven't since, I mean, in the 40s it began to change when Carl Rogers created client-centered therapy, and that just spread like wildfire because it made sense. And in that situation, I'm putting these two together now. When I was doing therapy, I know that I'm not separate from my clients. I know that I'm not, you know, that we're all crazy, right? We're all caught in this illusion. In that sense, we're all delusional, right? And I know I'm as delusional as they are, but in different ways. Some of them are much more functional than they are, right? So I can get away with it. But
he would not only say it about therapy. I mean, in the educational discussions, he would say the same, you know. Can the student and the teacher learn, the teacher and the student learn together? And of course, the teacher is an authority in the field of its knowledge, the academic.
Right.
But as on the human level, both are afraid. He would say. So can they learn together and both are afraid? So acknowledging that somehow.
Yeah. And I don't think that you're doing that quite so much as you know in therapy. No, you know. But so that's the other thing about it. It's not all about knowing what's going on. It's not all about that. It's not all about dissembling the self and seeing how things tick and what isn't working. So much that goes on in there is what Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard, which is, you know, creating a space with the client in which one can look together but it allows the client to look for him or herself, and without judgment. I mean, the judgment's going to rise up, but you can soften that by being there without judgment. So here the client is experiencing for the first time, they come with something shameful, and they're terribly ashamed of it, and the client's response is, you know, okay, well, tell me about it. It's not like, you know, that doesn't happen. So, I mean, as far as I can say, that's a form of love, and that's what's left out of the description there. We heal in healing environments. And love is a healing environment. So, I mean, there are other things that are going on in the therapy. It's not 1930s analysis. It's something else that's going on.
You guys have the questions.
We have the question.
It seems a little like a paradox. Like, okay, there's the self. I realize that I, like, physically am separate than both of you, or even this chair and this table. And everything in my life is telling me that and reinforcing this idea that I am this very separate person and that these little things about me are part of me and who I am. So how does that, that contrasted with, seeing the issues that identification can cause, it almost seems like my brain is trying to do two things at once that seem very different. I don't know if I worded that articulately,
I'm
but
not quite sure I got that.
yeah. So on one hand, I realize that I'm a separate individual and that there's these things maybe about me that I can identify with, that my conditioning and society and culture are telling me that that is you, and that's something that's totally different than Jaap or everyone else in this room. And yet we're talking about this, we're talking about, number one, the problems of identification, but also somehow we're all connected. How is that so? If everything in life has been telling me you're not, you are separate, or these things about you are actually you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I said also just 15 minutes ago is that most of it is very transparent, right? We're acting it out without knowing. So I feel that's one element. But the other element is that there is separateness on the superficial level, but you are also trying to become. I mean, that movement of becoming is in you, and is in you, and is in me. So on that level, we're the same. But on momentary, of course, it just has a little bit of a different content. I don't know if that...
Yeah, well, there's a difference, too, between different and separate, right?
Yeah.
We can be different without being separate. And I think if we realize that those differences are really superficial, and this is what happens in dialogue, a lot of good dialogues, you just realize after a while that whatever we're talking about, we're really, or whatever our personalities are and our histories are, there's something else that's going on underneath that. There's a sense of that communion that you mentioned, that begins to show up.
May I say something?
Yeah, we have 10 more minutes, so yeah. There's a microphone behind you, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Think about it. All the waves in the ocean forming and disappearing in the when it's arriving to the beach. But beneath those waves, there is eternal blue ocean. There is one pure consciousness, if I may, and we all form individualistic way to answer your question. Better yet, if you can think of about ornaments made out of gold, something bangles, something necklace, earring.
Please don't make it too long, because
No. I'm
if you have a
finishing.
question, try to put it as a question, and if it's...
So basically, underneath there is gold. To the question you asked, we all are connected in that. He mentioned at the end in his lecture, when you go meditation, absolute void. And if you take it much further, then you can forget about your individual self, and you can mix with that supreme self. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. questions from the audience also? Or not?
No, but if we have time, I wanted to. Yeah.
No, we stay.
I was just wondering, like, I don't know very much, so I'll try to be quick. Krishnamurti talks about escape, all the escape, right? So, if anything is some form of escape, if your desire, your chronic dissatisfaction leads you to ways of escaping, then that would be unproductive. But the desire to be better, even just to know more, life flows along and you do things. Is there a difference in there somehow, in terms of what you were talking about, the kind of the chronic dissatisfaction with yourself or whatever? Does that make any sense? No, maybe not.
Can I speak? I speak to that. I think there is a difference. I think there's a difference between wanting to be a better me, because I'm measuring me, I'm comparing me with other me's, and some of these me's seem to be better than me, and I want to catch up with them. You know, that kind of nonsense, which is, I call it nonsense, but we do it. And the difference to the desire to improve your life because, you know, you got holes in your roof and you want to have you don't want the rain to come in. Or because you have a love of medicine and you want to go to medical school. You know, I think that's a different thing.
It's time? Yeah, good. So it's time. Huh? Last question?
I don't know if it's a 2-minute question, but it's more just wondering about how this all relates to what Krishnamurti said about getting the house in order, and what the role of, you know, if there's a role that Western psychology has in that, like you were just talking about.
That's not a 2-minute question.
Yeah, I know. That's why I said that.
The house in the order, as I see it, is one's life in order, right? Not one's ego in order, and that's what we keep mistaking it.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Because it often seems like, usually when most of us think of getting the house in order, it's the ego house you were just referencing.
Right, and you know, that's a never-ending process. If the thing's illusionary in the first place, how are we going to perfect it? You know, it's not possible.
You know, when I was playing with this whole comparison of Krishnamurti and psychology, I was really trying to do it not so much there's something wrong with psychology, but I feel as a culture, as a human society, from all angles, education, psychology, employment, and all areas, we need to bring somehow these kind of questions in of freedom, of becoming, and so it's actually also a call upon, for those who are very serious about psychology and about these questions, to take this seriously in and at least contemplate that. And I'm sure, as you said, there's quite a few people already doing that, and I've met many psychologists who are doing that. But it's not always mainstream, you know, the whole notion of helping and adapting people to current society is still an important aspect. So, okay, let's keep it here. We're going to have a little break, a few minutes, and then thank you, Leah, and thank you. Terry. A few minutes, and then Zoic is going to play on the piano. Do you have the introduction? Do you know what he plays? No. And he will introduce the pieces. So, yeah. So it's a few more minutes, and then the piano will play.